forms, that we can actually see in the office. And then I'm going to correlate that to what we see with different physical symptoms that will actually show up with different people. The key for understanding this, both physical symptoms and in PTSD, is it is a suppression of something. And I'll get into what we're suppressing with PTSD, and I'll get into what we're suppressing when we get to the physical symptoms. So that being said, I want to thank you for being here, because my hope and my prayer is that by being here, you learn how to help somebody else that you know. Yes, we want you to get healthy, but I want us to do a little more than that. I want us to teach somebody else something. I want us to teach a friend, a family member, an acquaintance, somebody on the plane, somebody on the bus, wherever it is, something that we learn at these talks. Because my goal here is to help us all become very, very good at being critical thinkers. That means people who don't just take everything at word's sake, but actually test it, actually see what's going on. And I'll give you an example of this. I've talked about this before, but it's been a while, so I'm going to say it again. If you've heard it, don't boo me, just let me say it. If you've heard of the spotlight effect, this is what we can see happening in our culture. And I'll give you an analogy of this. So there's a police officer and he's driving along and he sees this guy and he's over on the ground looking. So he gets out of his car and he comes over and he goes, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my keys." He goes, "Okay." So he gets down. "Well, where should I look?" "Oh, look over there." So he's looking around, looking around. About 2 or 3 minutes into this, he goes, "Where'd you lose them?" "Well, I lost them over there, but there's no light over there." So what I'm showing you is that story is that when people tell you something, they'll tell you to look in a certain place, but that doesn't mean where the answer is. When they tell you something, what I want you to be able to do is critically think through how the body works and then be able to go, is this real? Or is this something that somebody else wants me to believe? Because my goal here is for you to question everything. Don't just take it at sake. Question me. I'll show you the research. I'll show you the different things if you want it. I'll tell you who I learned it from. I'll tell you why I say it. I'll tell you why I see the changes that I see. But I want you to question things. If you go to the allopathic or the medical field, that's not asked. Do not question me. I am doctor. I know best. But that's not how I want things to be. I want you to be thinkers that are critical so that you know the answer for yourself, not just you know it for a day because you memorized it and then it went away. I want you to know it because you know why it actually is happening and why things are working the way they are. So first off, I'm going to start with something that a lot of you may know, some of you may not. We're just going to go through brainwaves again like we usually do, the different frequencies. And then we're going to get into what PTSD actually shows up like in the brain and what I look for. And then we're going to get into why PTSD is what it is and why physical symptoms are the way they are. And then we'll get into the closing. So with that being said, we're going to talk about two people. We're going to talk about Jane. And Jane is an outgoing, go-getter, 16-year-old girl. Just got her car, driver's license. She's driving around, having fun. But Jane just, broke up with her boyfriend a couple weeks ago. So she's stressed out because she thought this was the love of her life. Jane also is very driven by her parents and internalizes that if she doesn't get straight A's, she's not worth anything. She also just had a car accident. Can we see the different stressors that are in her life? If she just lives in a city as well, we got smog everywhere. If you ever flown into Utah, it's the coolest thing to see. It's not good for you, but you can literally see the inverse. You can literally see the smog when you fly in. You mean clean air, and then you come down and you go through the smog, and you can see it. So that's a chemical stress. So if we think about little Jane, you go, well, Can a 16-year-old get PTSD? The answer is yes. Could it be from something like repetitive emotional stress of thinking she's going to fail a grade? Yeah, it can literally be just that. Could it be the car accident? Yes, it could be that. Could it be that she broke up with a boyfriend and got PTSD? Yes. And this is what I'm trying to show you. It doesn't have to be that you went to war. It doesn't have to be that you saw something traumatic. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, literally only indicates that your brain couldn't handle the stress that it was under and wanted to get away. The next one we're going to talk about is John. John, 47, producer at work, but he's got a sales job. He's worried about his mortgage. He's worried about when's the next sale going to come. He's also worried about, can I get my kids into the right school? He's also worried about, my wife seems angry and she drinks a little too much. Can that stuff all drive PTSD? Yes. Do you see how I haven't said anything about war yet? And a lot of people associate PTSD just with military combat, but it happens all the time. We chronically see people that are in car accidents that say they're fine that have PTSD. Mm-hmm. What is the major sign that somebody has PTSD? Memory problems. That is the major sign that you have PTSD, is your memory is not as good as it was after an event. So what happens is there are different brain waves. And the key brain wave for PTSD is alpha. The alpha brain wave is a brain wave specifically firing at 8 to 12 hertz. Why is alpha important? Alpha is your ability to visualize. Alpha is your memory. Alpha is in the zone, in the flow. Alpha is that state where everything just works. Guess what happens with PTSD?
It depletes it.
So exactly. With PTSD, it actually turns it off. It suppresses it. Now, there's other brain waves, like theta, 3.5 to 8 hertz, and beta, 13 to 38 hertz. These are the only ones I'm going to talk about today. And are you okay, sir? Okay, thank you. Sorry, everybody out there. We just had a little feedback on the phone. So alpha, again, memory, being in the zone of the flow. Theta, subconscious relaxation. Theta is being intuitive. Theta is light sleep. And then beta is stress. Beta is a brain firing really fast, very productive. Are we all good with the frequencies so far? Okay. So what happens here is, do we need to write anything down? Or are we good with these? We're all good? Okay, perfect. So what happens is there's very specific things that we'll see happen. So when we look at the brain, we can see PTSD show up here, here, and here. And we look for very specific things when we're looking for PTSD. On these two areas, we look at how alpha and theta are doing. In the front, we look at how alpha and beta are doing. The location in this back is O1. On the top is CZ. On the front is F3, F4, and FZ. The one that is the scariest for most people to experience is when your PTSD emotions are released at O1. Why is O1 the scariest for most people? Because this is subconscious. This is not something you're thinking about. This is not something you may even be aware of. So if you remember when you first came in, I talked about what can happen when we have a breakthrough. We can have emotional releases. What are these things that can happen? We can have old memories come up. We can have crying. We can feel uncertain. We can feel dizzy. We can feel discombobulated. We can feel like we're having an anxiety attack. We can feel like we're losing control of ourselves. And we just don't know what to do.
What about dreaming, like bad dreams or nightmares?
So the question was, what about dreaming and bad dream and nightmares? Yes, 100%. Because when we actually have the release, now you have to process through the emotional trauma that you haven't dealt with. So you're going to have different dreams. The other thing that can give you those things is if you eat like processed meats before you go to bed, that can give you weird dreams as well. So just FYI.
Okay. Alcohol won't do that to you, though, will it?
Alcohol can, so the question was, can alcohol do that to you? If you have emotional trauma that you haven't processed, when you drink alcohol, it can actually have that come up because it will actually slow your brain down and then allow those things to come up. Another example of this that we see when people are awake, and we saw this very prevalent when marijuana first became legal, was all the people getting really freaked out when they consumed a lot of marijuana, because marijuana will actually pull you down into these two frequencies. And if you haven't processed something, all those bad feelings and memories and emotions come out. So that's why some people, when they were first doing it, you're hearing about a lot of people having bad experiences, and it was because the person hadn't dealt with whatever trauma had happened in their life. So that's the big one, is the back of the brain, the O1. The top isn't as bad because that's semi-conscious. You're aware of some of what's going on. It's going to be more physical related. And then the very front, it's not as hard as well because you're dealing with more of that conscious. You're aware of what's going on, but it'll help you process through this. So what do we look for specifically? What we're going to look for is how your brain is set up.
I have a quick question, I'm sorry, before you move on. When you're saying the frontal, the prefrontal cortex is the F3, F4, FZ, is that 3 different areas?
There are 3 different points.
Oh,
So it's literally here, here, and here.
Oh, okay, so like basically temple and third eye.
Not even temple,
Just
it
a
would be
little
like
up,
third
up.
eye and left, right above the eye,
Okay.
right above, right below the hairline.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
So, where's that? So what we're looking at here is the different aspects of what shows up. When somebody has PTSD, what will happen is their protective mechanism to not experience that trauma from reliving in their head over and over and over and over again is to actually suppress the alpha frequency so they don't have to remember it. So what do I look for with PTSD? Suppressed alpha response at O1 and CZ in combination. That is the cardinal hallmark sign of PTSD. If we see a negative alpha response, and how we measure this is when your eyes are open, alpha should be at a certain level, but as soon as you close your eyes, your alpha should spike up. Your memory should get better. So that's why when you're really trying to remember something, you'll look up, you'll use your frontal lobe. If that doesn't work, you'll actually close your eyes because it will actually push up your alpha response and your memory can process better What we'll see with PTSD is when you close your eyes, it'll actually drop. So you don't want to remember stuff. And this is a pattern that your brain uses to not have you completely remember it over and over and over again. But what happens with alpha, it's memory, right? So you're suppressing the memories, everything. It is a very good short-term response to a trauma, pushing alpha down. It's a very bad response in long-term because now you can't remember it. So then what do we look at? Well, if the person comes in, what we're supposed to see is theta being really, really high. Then, or the other way around. Alpha being really, really high, and then theta being low.
That's
That's a proper ratio in those two areas. But what we will find with PTSD is theta is really, really high, sleep mode is really, really high, and alpha is really, really low.
so switched.
It's, yeah, switched is exactly what we're seeing. And what we look for those emotional breakthroughs is when your alpha response goes higher than your theta response. And then all the Pandora's box, all the emotional baggage that you haven't dealt with will come out. And if you're not ready for it, it can be very scary. And so we'll have people, and we'll literally tell them, and I tell everybody this on day 2, this is the responses that can happen. And I almost feel like when I say that, people don't think it's true. But I'm telling you this again, it's true. When this happens, all the demons you haven't dealt with will come out. So what are symptoms that you can get from this? You could get dizzy, you could get anxiety attacks. You could literally get heart rate that goes fast, breathing gets fast. You're scared, you can't stop thinking about stuff. Your mind's racing, you can't sleep. You don't want to eat. All these things can happen because now you're actually processing through that trauma that you haven't dealt with for years. That makes sense?
You said not eating was one of those?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So it's all the stress responses that you can ever have will show up. Cold hands, cold feet, decreased blood flow to the digestive tract so you don't feel hungry, not able to think clearly because you're literally pulling the blood flow
Still
away.
like putting you into fight or flight?
Yes, putting you into fight or flight. The question was, would that put you into fight or flight? Yes. The same thing will happen at CZ, except for with CZ, a lot of these things you're aware of. So that's why we ask, are you ready to have that emotional change? Are you ready to work on these different things? Because this is what can show up. And then when it does, for most people, it's heavy cathartic crying is the release. But we can have those other things show up as well. Well, I haven't stopped crying for a couple of days, doc. Perfect. You're dealing with that underlying stress that you haven't dealt with for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, however long it is. Once that happens the first time, this is the scariest point, 01. Once that happens, it will never be that bad again. It will literally only be 5 or 10% and you won't even think about it. But the first time when you let it all out, it can be scary. And if you let it all out, then you'll actually heal. Because the important thing of this part of the brain is the back, is it determines how fast the whole brain works. So if you've dealt with a lot of stuff and you're making this part of the brain run way too fast, you literally can't be calm, and then you're prone to OCD problems. You're prone to immune issues, like autoimmune, immune deficiencies, all these different things. So that's these two areas, we look for the same thing. In the frontal lobe, another pattern will actually show up. And that pattern is completely different. What that pattern looks like is in the frontal lobe, it's supposed to be theta is the biggest, then alpha is the second biggest, and beta is the third biggest. And what we'll actually see in the frontal lobe is you suppress that alpha or memory by speeding up stress. So you'll overproduce beta. And your beta is higher than your alpha. So you keep yourself busy all the time so you don't have to think about the past. So these are go, 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 never stop, always busy, always doing stuff, always crash, wake up, don't want to think about stuff, let's start going. That's this person where the frontal lobe is stuck like that. For them, when we see alpha go above beta, that's when their emotional stuff will come up. But it is not anywhere close to what 01 is. 01 is the keystone to emotional health. F3, F4, FZ, the frontal lobe, that's like maybe 10 to 20%. Top of the brain, another 10 to 20. The majority of it is the back of the brain. So are we seeing here that PTSD is actually suppression of memory? That makes sense? And when it comes up, those memories have to be dealt with. What I'm telling you here is why 90% to 100%, I can't say 100, but 90% of most neurofeedback places will not touch a one because they don't want to deal with the person's emotional stuff. But we know that if we deal with this and you feel safe and you actually process through, your life is changed forever. That trauma will no longer run you. Your stress response will go down. You will heal. If we don't touch this and just do brain brightening at the top and the front, the person will feel good, but the underlying dysfunction will progress and will keep getting worse. This is why we know we have to help this first and help you move through that trauma and then see big changes. And that's why we recommend, if you've had major traumas, that you need a counselor or somebody that you trust to talk to. Now, the other part of this is, I'm not sure if you're aware that there is, I'll do a real simple one. Most people aren't aware that there are meridians or energy centers that go through the body. And these meridians, the key to understanding them is they correlate to specific muscles. So the one I'm going to talk about now is...
Or organs.
Or organs, yes. So the meridian that I'm going to talk about is the one that is correlated to low back pain. So what muscle is the one that causes you to have low back pain? It's when your glutes, the biggest muscles in your body, actually fatigue. The meridian or organ system that is correlated with that is your testes and your ovaries or your reproductive system. When you suppress an emotion or when you suppress a thought, it will actually deactivate those muscles. So when somebody's like, I'll just deal with it later, what they're saying is, let's see how long it takes for my back pain to show up. That's literally what they're doing. Because when you push down that emotion or that feeling or that thought and don't process through it, you're actually inhibiting that reproductive energy or organ from working correctly. And as a byproduct, the muscles will actually stop firing. Interesting. To the point where 90% of the people that come in that have low back pain, all they have to do is literally touch the meridian points and the muscles will refire. And then the back pain will go away. But if they don't deal with the underlying emotion, the pain will keep coming back over and over and over. And understand, when you have that deactivated muscle because you're not allowing it to work correctly, now you make it weak. Now you make yourself prone to disc herniations. Now you make it prone to rotating the segments. Now you make yourself prone to pain. So we'll have people come in and go, oh no, doc, my back pain's because of this disc herniation. I go, well, you got to start a little higher. You have to deal with the fact that you didn't deal with something. And now that muscle is turned off. And now you have that back. Or you haven't dealt with something. And now you're suppressing that part of your brain from working correctly. And now your shoulder doesn't work. And now XYZ doesn't work. And it's not that it doesn't completely work. It's that it's working at 50%, 60%. And so you don't have proper firing. That's where the physical problems come in. That's how you grow arthritis. That's how you grow back pain. That's how you grow different dysfunctions, is that you're literally suppressing the emotion, suppressing the thought. Just like with PTSD, you're suppressing the memory. So I wanted to bring this in because those are things that most people haven't heard about or talk about. If you have a true physical symptom causing low back pain, your problem, any physical area, will go away in 2 weeks to a month max. If it's truly just a physical problem and not a neurological one due to stress. So you have somebody who has chronic low back pain, they're not dealing with something in their life. Chronic shoulder pain, they're not dealing with it. Specifically left shoulder pain, they're not dealing with an emotion and they're suppressing. Yes.
So if you start to deal or you work on that part of the brain that is adjusted for, that has been turned off or adjusted, and you get it to reacting better, does it automatically make those muscles start working, or do you need to do something to go along with
Depends.
it?
So the question is, when we reactivate the brain, does the muscle automatically start working? 95% of the time. Sometimes it needs a little help. But a lot of the time, you'll hear of what's called a psychosomatic reaction, which means that when you have this emotional stress, something will turn off. Something will change. And when we remove that stress in the brain, that weight that just keeps holding you down all the time that you haven't dealt with, then you'll literally watch that problem go away. So if you notice, a lot of people will come in with symptoms here that are physical, and I don't even barely look at them. I look at the brain, because I know if we fix the brain, the physical stuff will go away. That's why we look at it the way we do. And then if it's a little more complicated, where the brain has been sick for so long that now you have an autoimmune digestive, then we may have to supplement with some other stuff. But if you fix the brain, the body will fix itself. The underlying problem is it an emotional thing, or is it a head injury? For me, it was a head injury. I had 8 concussions that damaged the right side of my brain, so I had left shoulder pain. If it's a head injury, it's a little different. So you have to just to correlate, well, what's actually going on and figure it out. So it's not as simple as, well, you have this, and if I do 12 adjustments, your pain will go away. It is if it's physical. But if it's emotional, it could take you 20 years. If it's chemical, it takes about 3 months, because it takes about that much time to get your liver to process all the toxins so that the referral problem goes away. So you have to figure out what's causing your problem. Is it a car accident and a suppressed emotion, and now your motor cortex isn't working correctly, and now you can't move and walk and your memory isn't right? Yeah, then we need to help you push out those things and you'll heal. Is it a head injury? Now we got to put out the brain inflammation. Depending on how long you've had that could take a couple weeks to 2 to 3 years, because it's how long you've primed that brain. So what we need to know is, what's the history of stress you've had in your life, and what's causing it? Is it emotional? That's the hardest one to help people with, but that's the majority of what we see. And that's why the back of the brain, in my career, with the thousands and thousands of people I've taken care of, I've only seen 4 people that the back of the brain, when they come in, is working correctly. And 2 of them had Down syndrome, so they weren't stressing about anything because they didn't know to stress about anything. That's wild. So that's how prevalent the emotional stress is in our culture. And that's why we have the mean stuff, and that's why we have the physical stuff, and that's why all this stuff comes up.
I wonder if it would be different in a different culture. Like if you took your mechanisms and everything to like Thailand and tested.
So the question is, would it be different in a different culture? Probably.
I would assume so.
Because if you go to certain places where they have what's called blue zones, or the people live the longest,
Right.
they have greater community and connection. So it's not even less stress, it's greater community, because we've isolated ourselves. So that's why the goal of my office is to make a community where we can help each other grow. But in blue communities where people live to 100, they usually have multiple families or generations all in the same area, so that you have that support. Yes, your parents can stress you out, but they also will support you. And your grandparents can support you, and you see these different things. So that's one of the things that I think is a major component that we're missing in our Western culture,
Sure.
is the multiple generation support system.
Absolutely. Or
So
community in general.
community in general, yes. So with that being said, if you have a friend or family member who has memory issues, gets anxiety attacks, has problems falling, I'll talk about this one, then I'll get to the very end. You ever thought it was interesting that with PTSD, when they fall asleep, they can jump out of bed with bad memories? You ever heard of that? Like, they'll talk about it. So what happens with PTSD, when you're awake and you're in that beta state, to fall asleep, you have to actually go through alpha. So you'll actually have those memories come up, and that's why they'll jump right out of bed, is because those processing things will actually show up.
Like before they fall asleep?
As they're falling asleep, or as they're processing while they're sleeping.
Okay.
These things can happen. So if you have a friend or family member who had something that you may think is minor, it could be causing the PTSD. It could be causing the suppressed memory. So that's the key that I want people to understand, is their memory problem might be from bullying. And it might be from one time that one person said something. It doesn't have to be repeated. Their PTSD might be from a car accident. It might be from the fact that their dad died and they're even in their 40s. It could be anything. And the only reason we really know what's going on is if we actually test their brains. So if you have a friend or family member who's having memory issues or sleep issues, get them tested. It's the cheapest, easiest way to know what's really going on. And then we'll really know how to help that person. And we can tell them, no, you don't have that problem. You have, like, if you come in and you have memory issues and the EEG is clear, then I go, you definitely have a digestive issue and you don't have enough neurotransmitters, no questions. How many do I see? Never. But it could be, it is possible, or it could be both things. But when these things are happening, understand that your friend or family member could be experiencing a stress that you think is minor, but can literally be affecting them because they don't process the world the same way. So
My question is, for therapy, when you're depressed and things, in my case, what picks me up the most is I'm a guitar player. So music just picks me way up.
So the statement was,
So,
can I say your name?
yeah,
For Ron, he says, if he's having depression or different things like that, guitar will help him. What he's actually telling us, and for everybody online, if you get cut off, I'm sorry. I know we're close to getting over. What he's actually telling you is playing guitar is actually a right brain activity. So when you stimulate the right brain, it will actually upregulate serotonin, and it will actually make you get out of depression because serotonin will actually pull you out of those states. If you need help with right brain training, we actually have a piece of paper that has multiple right brain training activities. So one of them is that color word thing that will actually pull you out. Another thing, the Stroop effect is what it's called. We have a list of them. If you want them, just ask. We have them out on the table, and they're all things that you can do that will drive up the right brain. 99% of people are right brain deficient. So, friend or family member needs some help, give them that paper. It can literally change their life. You want to get a little deeper? Have them come in and see what we do. You want to get a little deeper? We can run an exam. Do your best to try to help your friend or family members around here, because most people feel like there's nothing they can do for depression besides take a drug, but there are multiple ways we can help them. So I want to thank you all for being here. Spread the light and have a good night.
Oh,
Thank you,
second.